And we're talking about Agenda 21, the agenda for the 21st century. You've been going through the changes already, by the way, since 9/11. That was part of it, actually, to kick it all off, because perpetual war and perpetual war on society as well, until society is totally reshaped and mushed into its proper shape. And you understand that this is there's not an area of social life that hasn't been, it's not dominated by a particular organization or a few organizations all working together in this big world governmental system. And in Britain is collectivism. They're using a form of collectivism, and they call it communitarianism, a term first heard by the public by George Bush Sr. in one of the speeches he made. And this one is from Britain. It says, localism bill makes further progress. They like to muddy the waters by giving it different terms for the same thing. So the government has said it is prepared to consider further changes to its flagship localism bill, which contains proposals for major planning reform, including a new tier of land use plans at neighbourhood level. You see, eventually in your little neighbourhood, you'll have a little Soviet system there, where a leader will be presented to you, not elected, and he'll go off to the World Bank and borrow money for your area, and you will have to pay off all the loans, you see, on a low level. And that gets it off the government's back. However, you're still paying all of the taxes you're presently paying to the federal government as well, and to the EU Parliament. There's two big ones to pay for now. Now your third one is for your local level as well, and much bigger payments will be needed because you'll pay too for the corporations' factories to be built and stuff like that, or whatever kind of business they put in there. And it's not democratic because the new system is not meant to be democratic. The Club of Rome said that they favored, of all the systems that they studied, they favored the collectivism system, and they liked the Russian model really because everyone obeyed the federal government. Of course they did, or they'd kill you. But they could simply, there was no arguments from the general public. You weren't allowed to argue, and that's what you're under today. There's no such thing as democracy, as you can well see. Simply diktats coming down from the top, and you do what you're told. So, as I say, the Club of Rome is one of the big think tanks for the United Nations, and many of its members interlap with other organizations, world organizations, including the Bilderbergers. And in fact, some of their stuff is read off every year at the Bilderbergers meeting. Because, as I say, they are the ones who said we cannot have a democratic society. It doesn't work. And that's what you're in today. You're under authoritarianism. There's a site I'm going to put up tonight, along with maybe the government site as well, or the United Nations site. But this one here gives you Agenda 21 in an easy lesson. And people really are losing their ability to concentrate today because they just consume data, and most of it's irrelevant. They can't remember much after it. So this is for those who want it short and sweet. It says, and it goes through sustainable development. What is sustainable development? It says, according to its authors, the objective of sustainable development is to integrate economic, social, and environmental policies in order to achieve reduced consumption. Remember now you're called post-consumerist since the last bank crash. It's all planned. See, this came long before the bank crash. Social equity. And that means literally they'll have to put chains on people who are a bit fitter than people who are not, and put weights on them, just like that movie I mentioned before. I might put the link up again tonight. And the preservation and restoration of biodiversity. Actually that will come up again next year when Maurice Strong heads the Earth Summit Part 2. Biodiversity means that you have animal corridors. They're allowed into neighborhoods, including the pumas, by the way, in Florida, and stuff like that. The countries, while we're still alive, they're rewelding them, and as we start dying off, basically, because nobody's having children. Sustainabilists insist that every societal decision be based on environmental impact, focusing on three components: global land use, that's all your farming and everything, and where you live; global education, that's your indoctrination and propaganda; and global population control and reduction. That's a big, big part of it. And you're going to hear more and more of that as you try and convince the victims to sterilize themselves. That's part of it too. I would always blame you. Understand, it's nothing to do with what they're saying. What they're really after is a world for their own selves and their own offspring to inhabit without all of us here. in the near future. That's what it's all about. I hope you understand that. And use all these fear tactics to terrify you. Then social equity, social injustice. Social justice is described as a right and opportunity for all people to benefit equally from the resources afforded us by society and environment. Redistribution of wealth, that's all Communist Manifesto stuff. It's right in Agenda 21 from the United Nations. Private property is a social injustice since not everyone can build wealth from it. National sovereignty is a social injustice. Universal health care is a social injustice. All part of Agenda 21 policy. Economic prosperity, public-private partnerships. That's where the public pay for all the big boys to have big roads and big systems built, and we pay for its upkeep and they take all the profit. Special dealings between government and certain chosen corporations which get tax breaks, grants, and the government's power of eminent domain to implement sustainable policy. Government-sanctioned monopolies. That's really what it is. That's what we talk about. Sanctioned monopolies. Local sustainable development policies, and under that comes smart growth, wildlands project, resilient cities. That's where they cram you into the slum areas for the next 40 years as we die off. That's all part of the agenda, folks. Regional visioning projects, STAR, S-T-A-R, sustainable communities, green jobs, that's where you work in fungus, I guess, green building codes, going green, alternative energy, local visioning, facilitators, these are the guys who con you into agreeing to go along with it all, regional planning, historic preservation, conservation easements, development rights, sustainable farming, comprehensive planning, growth management, and consensus. They must always get consensus so they can say, well, we told you, you went along with it. It's like voting. Well, you voted me in. I didn't tell you I wasn't going to take you off to war and kill half of you off. And then it says who is behind it. The ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, formerly International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. Communities pay ICLEI dues to provide local community plans. In Britain, it's communitarianism, they call it there, as they pretend to decentralize governments and give you local commissars to run your little community. And by the way, they can sell off your local community when you're in debt. I hope you realize that. That's land and all. And you own the land too. Software training, etc. Additional groups include American Planning Council, the Renaissance Planning Group, International City County Management Group, aided by U.S. Mayors Conference. You've got the Mayors Conference, and you've got International Mayors as well, associations belonging to the United Nations. National Governors Association, National League of Cities, National Association of County Administrators, and many more private organizations and official government agencies. Foundation and government grants drive the process. So your tax money drives your own demise. I hope you realize that. Where did it originate? The term sustainable development was first introduced to the world in pages of a 1987 report. 1987. It was called Our Common Future, produced by the United Nations World Commission on Environmental and Development, authored by Gro Harlem Brundtland, VP of the World Socialist Party. I hope you understand why they're using socialism. You know, the fascists use socialism. The term was first offered as official United Nations policy in 1992 in a document called United Nations Sustainable Development Agenda 21, issued at the United Nations Earth Summit, today referred to simply as Agenda 21, and that they are summits of private NGO run by Maurice Strong of Canada. We're all ashamed to say. And I'll read some more of this when I come back, because it's very important you understand what all these little bits of news you get are really all about, because the media ain't going to tell you. Back after this break.
You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, because you can handle the truth.
Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and we're cutting through the matrix. Now, Agenda 21 is agenda for the 21st century. It's only when you understand that will you understand all the bits that come into your newspapers on various topics, because the media doesn't explain things to you. It's not meant to. They want to keep you really disorientated and make you think that everything's irrelevant to each other. But they're not. They're all connected to each other, all these little items. What gives Agenda 21 the ruling authority? It's agenda for the 21st century. It says more than 178 nations adopted Agenda 21 as official policy during a signing ceremony at the Earth Summit. Now, Earth Summit, it's a private, the United Nations is a private organization. Hope you understand that. Maurice Strong works with private organizations. He's never been elected to anything by the public. And here he is, on behalf of his master, of course, who picked him up, presenting this charter to all the countries, and they all sign it into law. Why do they all sign it? Because, you see, they're told to. Every president and prime minister is pre-selected and told to go along with all of these United Nations goals. I hope you understand that. And it says, U.S. President George H.W. Bush signed a document for the U.S. and signing each nation pledge to adopt the goals of Agenda 21. In 1995, President Bill Clinton, in compliance with Agenda 21, signed Executive Order 12858 to create the President's Council on Sustainable Development in order to harmonize U.S. environmental policy with United Nations directives as is outlined in Agenda 21. The executive order directed all agencies of the federal government to work with state and local community governments in a joint effort to reinvent government. Remember that term? It was in the papers, reinvent government. Using the guidelines outlined in Agenda 21. A result, with the assistance of groups like the ICLEI, sustainable development is now emerging as government policy in every town, country, and state in the nation. It's across the whole planet, folks. We have it in every country. Revealing quotes from the planners, this is what it says. Agenda 21 proposes an array of actions which are intended to be implemented by every person on earth. Every person on earth. So those folk who are not persons, it doesn't apply to you. It calls for specific changes in all the activities of all people. All people. Effective execution of Agenda 21 will require a profound reorientation of all humans. They're doing that now through the school system. Unlike anything the world has ever experienced. Agenda 21, the Earth Summit Strategy to Save Our Planet. You can get that from Earth Press, 1993 it was published. And it says, and it goes on to say this, the realities of life on our planet dictate that continued economic development as we know it cannot be sustained. That's sustainable development, as they call it. That's why you're now post-consumerist. And you have to go into austerity. See how it ties together? Huh? Sustainable development, therefore, is a program of action for local and global economic reform, a program that has yet to be fully defined. The local Agenda 21 planning guide published by the ICLEI in 1996. It's been defined now, folks. No one fully understands how or even if sustainable development can be achieved. However, there's growing consensus it must be accomplished at the local level if it's ever to be achieved on a global basis. The local Agenda 21 planning guide published by the ICLEI in 1996. Agenda 21 and private property. Land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset controlled by individuals and subject to the pressures and inefficiency of the market. Private land ownership is also a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth, therefore contributes to social injustice. And that was from the report from the 1976 United Nations Habitat 1 conference. Private land use decisions are often driven by strong economic incentives that result in several ecological and aesthetic consequences. The key to overcoming it is through public policy. That was a report from the President's Council on Sustainable Development, page 112. Current lifestyles and consumption patterns of the affluent middle class involving high meat intake. I told you you're going to be vegetarian. That's why Toffler put it out in his Third Way book. Use of fossil fuels, appliances, home and work air conditioning, that's your electricity, and suburban housing are not sustainable. That was Mr. Maurice Strong, who was Secretary General of the United Nations Earth Summit in 1992. And then reinvention of government says we need a new collaborative decision process that leads to better decisions, more rapid change, and more sensible use of human, natural, and financial resources. What is resources to these characters at the top? In achieving our goals, that was a report from the President's Council on Sustainable Development. Individual rights will have to take a back seat to the collective. Collectivism, look it up. That was Harvey Reuven, Vice Chairman, ICLEI. That was the Wildlands Project at the United Nations. We must make this place an insecure and inhospitable place for capitalists and their projects. We must reclaim the roads and ploughed lands, halt dam construction, tear down existing dams, free shackled rivers, and return to wilderness tens of millions of acres presently settled land. That was Dave Foreman from Earth First. They love the earth, they just hate people except their own little clique. What is not sustainable? Ski runs, grazing of livestock, ploughing of soil, building fences, industry, single-family homes, paves and tarred roads, logging activities, dams and reservoirs, power line construction, and economic systems that fail to set proper value on the environment. That was from the United Nations Biodiversity Assessment Report. And the next part is hide Agenda 21, United Nations roots from the people. It says this: participating in a UN-advocated planning process would very likely bring out many of the conspiracy-fixated groups and individuals in our society. I read this on the air and then they changed the name of it after I read it, because they don't want the public to know about it. It says this segment of our society who fear one world government and a United Nations invasion of the United States through which our individual freedom would be stripped away, would actively work to defeat any elected official who joined the conspiracy by undertaking ICLEI 21. So we call our process something else. I kept talking about Agenda 21, so they changed the term, such as comprehensive planning, growth management, or smart growth. Smart growth, folks, is Agenda 21. So I'll put this up tonight along with the whole lot for those who still got a brain left, who like to plod through things. Very few folk have the attention span now because they're bombarded. Their minds have been altered by the computer and internet, and they're literally getting attention deficit via the internet. Planned that way. Neuroscientists work on the internet to make sure that you go this way and you can't retain things. So I'll try and get the whole lot up there too, along with this particular one, and you can take the easy one or the plow through the long one. It's up to yourselves. And we're talking about Agenda 21, the agenda for the 21st century. You've been going through the changes already, by the way, since 9/11. That was part of it, actually, to kick it all off, because perpetual war and perpetual war on society as well, until society is totally reshaped and mushed into its proper shape. And you understand that this is not an area of social life that makes further progress. They like to muddy the waters by giving it different terms for the same thing. So the government has said it is prepared to consider further changes to its flagship localism bill, which contains proposals for major planning reform, including a new tier of land use plans at neighbourhood level. You see, eventually in your little neighbourhood, you'll have a little Soviet system there, where a leader will be presented to you, not elected, and he'll go off to the World Bank and borrow money for your area, and you will have to pay off all the loans, you see, on a low level. And that gets it off the government's back. However, you're still paying all of the taxes you're presently paying to the federal government as well, and to the EU Parliament. There's two big ones to pay for now. Now your third one is for your local level as well, and much bigger payments will be needed because you'll pay too for the corporation's factories to be built and stuff like that, or whatever kind of business they put in there. And it's not democratic because the new system is not meant to be democratic. The Club of Rome said that they favored, of all the systems that they studied, they favored the collectivism. It's not dominated by a particular organization or a few organizations all working together in this big world governmental system. And in Britain is collectivism. They're using a form of collectivism, and they call it communitarianism, a term first heard by the public by George Bush Sr. in one of the speeches he made. And this one is from Britain. It says localism bill